If I had the option, the way them titty sags milk the cornbread, bitch, I promise you.
Hold on, baby. Everybody was bopping.
The whole hood knows you fair. That little train that he's on your way, I spin that shit every day. Let me make some shit clear.
On a typical evening in Jersey City, activity continued as usual along Martin Luther King Drive. Cars moved through traffic, businesses remained open, and pedestrians passed by without concern. Then, shortly after 8:30 p.m., multiple gunshots were reported in the area. When officers arrived, they found a 36-year-old woman lying unresponsive on the pavement, struck several times. No weapon was recovered at the scene, and the shooter was gone. At first, it appeared to be another shooting in a busy corridor, offering few immediate answers. Investigators began collecting evidence, reviewing surveillance footage, and speaking with witnesses, but the circumstances were unclear. What led the victim to that location? Who was responsible and why? As details slowly emerged, the case revealed connections that shifted the investigation in an unexpected direction. What seemed straightforward would soon prove more complex, raising questions that extended beyond the crime scene itself. You're watching Global Crime Venue, where viral fame hides chilling secrets. From TikTok dancers and Instagram couples to rising Facebook personalities, we reveal the dark side of the spotlight. When the perfect posts turn into tragedies, we break down exactly how it all unraveled. These aren't just online stories, they're real cases with real victims. And while you're here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new case breakdown. In our next episode, we'll dive into another shocking story of love, control, and a hidden danger that no one saw coming. Here's the untold side of what really happened. On the evening of December 4, 2020, Martin Luther King Drive in Jersey City remained active as it typically did. The corridor, known for its steady traffic, convenience stores, and foot activity, showed no immediate signs of disruption. Residents moved through the area, vehicles passed in both directions, and nearby businesses continued operating under normal conditions. Nothing at that moment suggested the night would be any different from countless others before it. At approximately 8:30 p.m., the routine nature of the area shifted. Jersey City police received multiple reports of gunfire along a section of Martin Luther King Drive. The calls were brief and urgent, indicating that several shots had been fired in close succession. Officers were dispatched immediately to investigate, following standard protocol for a shots-fired incident in a densely populated area. When officers arrived, they located a woman lying on the pavement near the roadway. She was unresponsive and had sustained multiple gunshot wounds to her torso. The scene was quickly secured to allow emergency personnel access and to preserve potential evidence. Paramedics attempted life-saving measures at the location before transporting the victim to Jersey City Medical Center. Despite medical intervention, she was later pronounced dead. The location of the shooting raised immediate questions for investigators. Martin Luther King Drive is not an isolated street, but a well-traveled corridor with residential buildings, commercial establishments, and regular pedestrian presence. The time of the incident meant that people were still outside, increasing the likelihood of witnesses and surveillance footage. At the same time, the busy nature of the area complicated efforts to immediately determine what had occurred. No firearm was recovered at the scene during the initial response, and the individual responsible for the shooting was no longer present when police arrived. Officers began canvassing the area, speaking with nearby residents, business owners, and anyone who may have been outside at the time of the gunfire. Investigators also started identifying security cameras that could have captured relevant footage before, during, or after the incident. At this early stage, authorities released limited information to the public. The victim was identified as a 36-year-old woman, later confirmed to be Aieshia McFadden. No motive was announced, and officials did not indicate whether the shooting was random or targeted. The lack of immediate clarity left investigators working with partial information as they attempted to reconstruct the sequence of events. Aieshia McFadden was a 36-year-old resident of Jersey City, New Jersey. She was the mother of 4 children and spent much of her time managing responsibilities related to childcare, housing, and personal stability. Records and available information indicate that her life was shaped by practical concerns rather than public visibility, and she was not a figure known outside of her immediate family and social circles. McFadden's background reflected the experiences of many individuals navigating urban life without consistent financial or institutional support. She faced periods of instability related to housing and income, which required adaptability and frequent movement between neighborhoods. These circumstances placed her in regular contact with a range of people, often through informal arrangements rather than structured or regulated environments. There is no indication that McFadden held a position that brought her into regular interaction with law enforcement or public agencies beyond routine civic matters. She did not have a documented history of violent offenses, nor was she known to be involved in ongoing criminal disputes. Her interactions with authorities, when they occurred, were primarily administrative rather than investigative. Investigators later reviewed McFadden's personal history to understand her daily patterns and social connections. This included examining phone records, recent communications, and known associates. At the time, these elements were considered part of establishing context rather than evidence of risk. Nothing in her recent activity clearly suggested that she anticipated a confrontation or danger. McFadden's personal relationships varied in form and stability. Some were long-standing, while others were more recent or informal. These connections were not initially viewed as significant but later became part of the broader effort to reconstruct her environment and interactions. Her background showed a reliance on personal networks rather than formal systems for support or protection. In the period preceding the shooting, Aieshia McFadden's life was structured around daily movement within Jersey City and regular interaction with public spaces. Her schedule was shaped by practical needs such as transportation, errands, and brief meetings with acquaintances. These activities placed her in areas with consistent foot traffic and commercial activity, including corridors that residents routinely pass through without incident. There was nothing about her presence in these locations that immediately suggested risk or deviation from normal behavior. Investigators later examined her recent interactions to determine whether any involved unresolved disputes or escalating tension. These interactions were not initially identified as significant and did not involve documented complaints or formal reports. However, law enforcement reviewed them closely to understand whether any connection existed between her recent contacts and the events that followed. This process involved identifying who she had been in communication with and how frequently those exchanges occurred. Financial limitations influenced how McFadden moved through the city, including reliance on familiar routes and accessible locations. Public areas offered convenience and predictability, which made them common destinations. Martin Luther King Drive, in particular, functioned as a central corridor where brief stops and encounters could occur without advance planning. From an investigative perspective, her presence there aligned with established movement patterns rather than spontaneous or unusual behavior. On the day of the shooting, McFadden's actions were consistent with prior routines observed by investigators. There were no confirmed indications that she altered her plans due to perceived danger or concern. Phone data, location tracking, and witness timelines were later reviewed to map her movements, but no single action stood out as an obvious catalyst. Her whereabouts earlier in the day did not raise immediate questions during the initial stages of the investigation. Law enforcement also evaluated whether McFadden had taken steps to avoid specific individuals or locations in the days leading up to the incident. No restraining orders, recent police reports, or emergency calls were directly linked to her during that time frame. This absence of documented conflict complicated efforts to determine whether the shooting stemmed from an ongoing situation or an encounter that escalated rapidly. Martin Luther King Drive functions as a continuous commercial and residential corridor with multiple intersecting side streets that allow rapid movement on foot or by vehicle. The section where the shooting occurred is surrounded by small businesses, multi-unit residential buildings, and convenience-based storefronts that operate on extended hours. This configuration results in intermittent pedestrian presence rather than constant crowds, particularly during evening hours. Law enforcement records indicate that this portion of the corridor has generated a consistent volume of service calls over time, including reports related to disturbances, assaults, and weapons-related activity. As a result, the area is familiar to patrol units, though it is not subject to permanent police monitoring or checkpoints. Response patterns are reactive rather than preventative, based on incoming calls. Physical conditions along the street include uneven lighting coverage due to storefront placement, building height variation, and parked vehicles. While streetlights and business lighting provide visibility in some areas, other sections fall into partial shadow. This affects sightlines for witnesses and limits the clarity of available surveillance footage, depending on camera angle and distance. Several buildings in the vicinity are equipped with exterior security cameras. However, coverage is fragmented. Cameras are privately owned, independently operated, and vary in resolution and retention capability. Some angles face entrances rather than the street, while others capture portions of sidewalks or intersections. This inconsistency requires investigators to piece together movement patterns from multiple sources, rather than relying on a single continuous recording. The street's design includes closely spaced intersections that connect to adjacent residential blocks and secondary routes. These access points create multiple exit options within a short distance, complicating efforts to immediately identify a direction of travel following a violent incident. Vehicle traffic further obscures movement, especially when incidents occur during open roadway conditions. From an investigative standpoint, the location presented both opportunities and constraints. The presence of nearby residences increased the likelihood of witnesses hearing the gunshots, while the absence of centralized surveillance limited immediate confirmation of events. Evidence recovery depended on isolating a narrow time window and correlating physical findings with digital and testimonial data. In the hours before the shooting, Aieshia McFadden followed her typical daily routine, moving between home and nearby errands. Earlier in the day, she completed regular tasks at local stores and made contact with several acquaintances, including friends and neighbors, with no reported conflicts or unusual interactions. Later in the evening, she traveled along Martin Luther King Drive, a major corridor in Jersey City, near familiar landmarks and businesses. Surveillance footage captures her movement in the area, though exact timestamps vary and were subject to ongoing investigation. Witness statements suggest she paused briefly near a business entrance shortly before the first gunshots. At the time, the area had moderate pedestrian and vehicle traffic. Police records indicate that the initial 911 calls reporting gunfire were made at approximately 8:30 p.m., establishing a narrow window between her last confirmed movements and the shooting. Shell casings recovered from the scene indicated multiple rounds fired in quick succession, with trajectory analysis and ballistic matching under review. Emergency responders arrived minutes after the reports, finding McFadden on the pavement with injuries to her torso. Witness statements confirmed that the suspect had already left the area before officers arrived. Investigators coordinated timestamps from emergency calls, surveillance footage, and eyewitness accounts to create a sequence of events leading up to the shooting. Digital evidence, including location data from cell phones, was also collected to confirm her movements and interactions during the day. Environmental factors such as lighting conditions, traffic patterns, and pedestrian activity were documented to provide context for her presence in the area. Forensic evidence, including bullet trajectories and the placement of shell casings, was logged and cross-referenced with witness accounts to construct a detailed timeline. Investigators focused on mapping her path through the corridor and identifying any interactions or observations that could explain why she was at that location at that time. All collected data was cataloged in preparation for connecting movements to potential suspects, while investigators refrained from drawing conclusions about motive or responsibility at this stage. At approximately 8:30 p.m., multiple gunshots were reported near 217 to 219 Martin Luther King Drive in Jersey City. Responding officers found a 36-year-old woman lying unresponsive on the pavement, her torso showing evidence of multiple gunshot wounds. No firearm was recovered at the scene, and witnesses indicated that the shooter had fled before authorities could arrive. The trajectory and placement of the bullets suggested a deliberate act. Law enforcement officials cordoned off the area and began documenting the scene, taking photographs, measuring distances, and collecting shell casings. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses was secured to identify potential suspects or vehicles that might have been involved. Officers canvassed the vicinity to locate witnesses, recording statements from anyone present at the time of the shooting. The victim's position and injuries indicated that she had been struck while standing or walking along the sidewalk, and no signs of struggle were observed in the immediate area. Forensic investigators collected ballistic evidence, including shell casings and fragments, to determine the type of firearm used. The angle of the shots suggested the shooter may have approached from a vehicle or from a position concealed from the main road. Witnesses described hearing between 3 and 5 gunshots in rapid succession, though details varied slightly depending on their location relative to the incident. The area was temporarily closed to traffic as officers continued securing the scene, ensuring that no potential evidence was disturbed. Emergency medical personnel transported the victim to Jersey City Medical Center for treatment. Law enforcement also searched surrounding streets for evidence that could indicate the shooter's path of escape. Investigators reviewed cellular activity in the area, seeking communication that might provide leads. The collection of evidence focused on establishing the sequence of events, the trajectory of the bullets, and the movements of both the victim and the suspect immediately before and after the shooting. Officers also examined personal items and footprints in the area for clues. Every detail of the crime scene was documented with the goal of reconstructing the encounter and identifying potential witnesses or physical evidence that could lead to the shooter's identification. At approximately 8:30 p.m., police officers arrived at Martin Luther King Drive following reports of gunfire. The victim was found lying on the pavement with multiple gunshot wounds. Officers immediately secured the area to maintain the integrity of the scene and prevent interference with evidence collection. A perimeter was established and officers began documenting the scene, noting the locations of shell casings and other physical evidence relevant to reconstructing the incident. Nearby objects and environmental factors were recorded, including street layout, lighting, and traffic conditions. Witnesses who remained in the area were separated and questioned to obtain initial statements, while recollections were still current. Emergency medical services were dispatched and arrived promptly, performing a rapid assessment of the victim, including checking vital signs and evaluating the severity of injuries. The victim was stabilized as much as possible on site before being transported via stretcher to Jersey City Medical Center for further medical evaluation. Law enforcement coordinated with emergency personnel to ensure the scene was preserved during treatment and transport. Officers took photographs, measured distances between key points in the area, and documented evidence locations to support subsequent forensic analysis. Throughout the response, communication was maintained between police units, dispatch, and hospital staff to relay status updates and ensure a coordinated approach. All observations, actions, and findings were recorded in official reports to provide a comprehensive account of the emergency response. The procedures at the scene followed standard protocols for handling shootings in public spaces, while maintaining evidentiary integrity and ensuring professional documentation of the response process. Following the shooting, residents gathered near the area while officers secured the scene and began processing evidence. Local businesses temporarily closed as investigators collected statements from witnesses who observed the incident. Social media posts circulated with updates about the presence of law enforcement in block streets, prompting members of the community to share information and seek details about the victim. Public officials requested cooperation with authorities during the ongoing investigation. Reports identified the victim as a 36-year-old woman, and media outlets provided basic information about her residence and family, including that she was a mother of 4. Residents expressed concern for safety in the corridor and shared first-hand accounts of the immediate aftermath. Witness statements and community updates contributed to the collection of preliminary information, allowing investigators to begin building a clearer picture of the circumstances surrounding the incident. After officers discovered the victim, the Hudson County Prosecutor's Office and Jersey City Police Department immediately initiated investigative procedures. Investigators focused on processing the scene for evidence, carefully documenting the surroundings through photographs, sketches, and detailed notes to ensure nothing relevant was missed. Shell casings and any physical items near the victim were collected and cataloged for analysis. Bullet trajectories and impact points were measured to help determine the relative positions of the victim and shooter. Officers conducted canvassing in the vicinity, speaking with nearby residents, pedestrians, and business owners to gather observations that might indicate suspicious activity or the presence of potential witnesses. Surveillance footage from nearby stores and buildings was obtained and examined for any movements or individuals connected to the incident. Investigators also began collecting and analyzing digital evidence, including mobile phone activity and relevant communications, to establish the victim's interactions and timeline leading up to the shooting. Physical evidence from the scene was sent to forensic laboratories for ballistics and trace analysis. Detectives compiled the collected information into organized reports, cross-referencing prior incidents in the area to identify patterns or leads. Each observation and piece of evidence was logged systematically to support the development of investigative strategies and guide the direction of subsequent interviews and follow-up actions. On a typical evening in Jersey City, activity continued as usual along Martin Luther King Drive. Cars moved through traffic, businesses remained open, and pedestrians passed by without concern. Then, shortly after 8:30 p.m., multiple gunshots were reported in the area. When officers arrived, they found a 36-year-old woman lying unresponsive on the pavement, struck several times. No weapon was recovered at the scene, and the shooter was gone. At first, it appeared to be another shooting in a busy corridor, offering few immediate answers. Investigators began collecting evidence, reviewing surveillance footage, and speaking with witnesses, but the circumstances were unclear. What led the victim to that location? Who was responsible and why? As details slowly emerged, the case revealed connections that shifted the investigation in an unexpected direction. What seemed straightforward would soon prove more complex, raising questions that extended beyond the crime scene itself. The suspect in the shooting of Aieshia McFadden was identified as Thaddeus Williams, a 37-year-old resident of East Orange, New Jersey. Following the incident, investigators developed information linking Williams to the scene, and law enforcement executed an arrest in East Orange. Williams was charged with murder, possession of a firearm for an unlawful purpose, and unlawful possession of a firearm, reflecting both the lethal nature of the incident and his access to a weapon. Additionally, prosecutors filed a charge of criminal sexual contact, indicating behavior toward the victim that extended beyond a confrontation. Following his arrest, Williams was held at the Hudson County Correctional Facility pending formal court proceedings. Evidence collected during the investigation, including witness statements, surveillance review, and forensic analysis, was used to substantiate the charges. Williams subsequently entered a guilty plea to aggravated manslaughter, a first-degree offense, and was sentenced to 20 years in state prison under the No Early Release Act. The legal process followed standard judicial procedures, including pretrial hearings, plea negotiations, and sentencing. The combination of the charges reflected a multifaceted evaluation of his actions during the incident, focusing on both the use of the firearm and the interactions with the victim at the time of the shooting. Williams' background, residence, and criminal history were documented by authorities as part of the case file to provide context for his involvement and to support prosecutorial decisions regarding plea and sentencing. After investigators identified connections between the shooting and Thaddeus Williams, 37, of East Orange, New Jersey, law enforcement coordinated his apprehension. Officers located and took him into custody, transporting him to a secure facility for questioning. Williams was formally charged with murder and unlawful possession of a firearm, as well as additional offenses arising from preliminary evidence indicating further criminal involvement. Prosecutors filed the charges after confirming probable cause through collected physical evidence, witness statements, and analysis of the suspect's movements surrounding the incident. Following the filing, Williams remained in custody pending initial court appearances. Investigators continued to compile supporting evidence, including forensic analysis of ballistics, review of electronic communications, and cross-referencing witness accounts to reconstruct a timeline. Court documents outlined the legal basis for each charge, detailing the suspect's actions during and after the shooting. The arrest and formal charges marked the official transition from investigation to prosecution, with authorities continuing to build a case to establish a full account of the events. As the investigation progressed, authorities uncovered information that expanded the scope of the case. Digital evidence, including call logs and messages between the victim and the suspect in the days prior, suggested possible motive and premeditation. Witnesses reported observing the suspect in the vicinity shortly before the incident, and their statements helped establish the sequence of movements leading to the shooting. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses captured the suspect's approach and departure, providing investigators with a clearer timeline. During the search of the suspect's residence, law enforcement recovered a firearm that matched ballistic evidence from the scene, linking the weapon to the shooting. Additional reports indicated the suspect had been involved in prior conflicts and had a history of concerning behavior, which became relevant in assessing intent. Investigators documented specific elements at the crime scene, including shell casing placement and blood patterns, to reconstruct the events with accuracy. These details, combined with witness statements and physical evidence, allowed authorities to form a more complete understanding of the circumstances surrounding the shooting. Every piece of information contributed to building the case and identifying the suspect's role in the incident, supporting the formal charges that would later be filed. After the arrest of Thaddeus Williams, the Hudson County court system initiated pretrial proceedings. Formal hearings addressed the charges of murder, unlawful possession of a weapon, and related offenses. The court reviewed procedural matters, including scheduling future hearings and motions submitted by both parties. Defense attorneys filed requests to challenge the admissibility of evidence and sought additional time to examine the materials provided by law enforcement. The prosecution submitted pretrial briefs detailing evidence and arguments to establish the suspect's alleged involvement in the shooting. Witness protection measures were considered, and conditions for testimony were set. Surveillance footage, forensic reports, and witness statements were entered into the court record for formal review. The presiding judge examined procedural compliance and ensured that legal standards were observed for both the defendant and the case. Discussions regarding potential plea agreements began, allowing both sides to explore resolutions without proceeding to a full trial. The court managed the scheduling of hearings, evidence presentation, and the orderly submission of legal arguments, setting the framework for the subsequent phase of the legal process. Aieshia McFadden was the mother of 4 children, each requiring different levels of care following her death. Family members assumed temporary guardianship, while child welfare authorities determined long-term arrangements. The children were enrolled in counseling and monitored by social workers to track their adjustment and overall welfare. Legal proceedings address custody and guardianship, establishing stable living conditions for each child. Coordination with educational institutions ensured their attendance and support in school. Child Protective Services worked alongside local agencies to provide housing, financial assistance, and access to medical care. Investigators also assessed potential risks to the children related to the suspect or environment of the incident. Case files documented ongoing supervision, mental health progress, and compliance with state regulations for minors affected by parental homicide. Professionals specializing in child trauma collaborated to maintain structured routines and reduce disruption to the children's development. And that concludes today's case. But remember, this is just one of countless stories the world has yet to uncover. Here on Global Crime Venue, our mission is to uncover the facts, honor the victims who can no longer speak, and make sure their stories are never erased. If what you heard today made you think, know this, more cases are on the way that will shock you, haunt you, and change the way you look at social media and the world around you. Be sure to subscribe, tap the like button, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. New investigations are released regularly, and trust me, you'll want to be here when the next story breaks. Before you leave, share your thoughts in the comments. What stood out to you most in this case? Your voice keeps these stories alive. Until we meet again, stay cautious, stay informed, and never forget, justice starts with truth. Global Crime Venue, uncovering the stories behind the screen.